This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Jamal.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. There's so much to cover. I mean, with the bombshell investigative reporting about the Pandora Papers, it has just opened up a Pandora's box of corruption, abuse, financial abuse, and essentially the looting of various countries' banks for the private good of individuals. And it's implicated a lot of U.S. allies in the Middle East, not the least of which, and this is the person that's gotten the most attention, has been, King Abdullah of Jordan. And we're going to be speaking, or you'll be speaking, we'll all be hearing from Daoud Kuttab, who's a journalist living in Jordan, who will give us an update of the bombshell, implications of this. But I think it's important to realize, why are certain people and kingdoms, specifically whether it's UAE or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and MBS, getting a pass? Should be a very interesting discussion.
You're right, Jess, but just a word of caution, the bombshell is not as big of a bombshell in the Middle East. It is, and also you've talked about the Middle East, but it's all over Europe, the UK, Tony
Putin.
Blair.
Yeah, it's everybody.
The Pandora Papers, just to remind our listeners, which we will be talking to journalist Daoud Kuttab, is a leak of almost 12 million documents. So this is the tip of the iceberg, which reveals basically hidden wealth, tax avoidance, and in some cases money laundering by some of the world's rich and most powerful.
Yes, and after that, we have to, we're going to be speaking about Jamal Khashoggi. It's been 3 years, after his brutal murder at the hands of what everybody knows and believes to be Mohammed bin Salman, the, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, soon to be king. And we should talk about why he gets a pass, not just on the Pandora Papers, but legally why he gets a pass. We'll be talking about Bristol University professor David Miller, who was basically sacked and removed as a result of some comments that he made about the apartheid state of Israel. And to me, Jamal, I don't think we can leave today without talking about your favorite uncle, Shimon Peres, your favorite grandfather and uncle, Shimon Peres, that everybody loves, that everybody reveres as a paragon of morality, has been accused, like the rest of the so-called, leadership of the apartheid state, of sexual assault and abuse. So we should cover that too.
Yes, we have a lot to talk about, but first, here is the interview with award-winning journalist Daoud Kuttab. The Pandora Papers is a leak of almost 12 million documents that reveals hidden wealth, tax avoidance, and in some cases money laundering by some of the world's rich and powerful. The data obtained by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, in Washington, D.C., which has been working with more than 140 media organizations on its biggest ever global investigation. Joining us to discuss this and more, Daoud Kuttab. Daoud is a Palestinian journalist, a media activist, and a columnist for Palestine Pulse. He's a former Ferris Professor of Journalism at Princeton University and is currently Director General of Community Media Network, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to advancing independent media in the Arab region. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Daoud.
Shukran, Jamal. Thank you.
So more than 600 journalists in 117 countries have been trawling through these files from 14 sources for months, finding stories that are still being published. This is a big story here in the United States. Did it have the same impact in the Middle East?
No. it had an impact, but I don't think it had the same impact. Countries in our region are very good at keeping information from their own public. And, obviously social media and internet and others have weakened this grip on the national news. But countries are still able to control not only the information, but also the framing of the information. So this case that involves the Jordanian monarch has been framed in a way, or has been explained away in a way that has not had the kind of effect that one would expect from another place.
Well, I mean, there is so much information in these leaks, and it will be impossible to cover all of them or even part of them in this interview. There is the Qatari ruling family, according to the information, which avoided 18.5 million sterling pounds in tax on a London supermansion. Then, of course, multiple stories about Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, who became owner of an $8.8 million Victorian building in 2017 by buying it through a British Virgin Islands company that held the property and was owned by the royal family in Bahrain and partner Zayed bin Rashid Al Zayani, and then, of course, Lebanon's billionaire Prime Minister Najib Mikati also is mentioned there, while the country is embroiled in a wrenching financial crisis. Then you mentioned King Abdullah of Jordan, and what they're saying, it's 70 million pounds spending spree on properties in the UK and US through secretly owned companies. Now, I was reading in Jordan that basically there was a press statement acknowledging that there were these purchases, but it's just like basically they denied impropriety about these purchases. I mean, is that the official position in Jordan?
Yes, as I said, the state media and most of the media, in fact, almost all the media, did not report on this case on the first day. On the first day it was published, but the second day, the royal court issued a long statement, actually, in which they, as you said, acknowledged that His Majesty the King, like his father and probably his grandparents, own lots of properties around the world. They said that they do it, they keep it secret because for security reasons, and that the most important thing they said in that statement was that never has any money been used from donor money or from the coffers of the government, that this was privately owned, private money that the king and his family has inherited, has owned. The Hashemites used to own prime property in Mecca and Saudi Arabia, and over the years they've been selling it. And so for many people, $160 million is a lot of money, but at the same time, for the rich, it's not that big of an amount.
Well, this is actually the important question, and that's why I'm actually talking to you about it. When it came out, this story in the headlines, the Washington Post and others, King Abdullah was prominent, along, and if as you've mentioned, $160 million is nothing in this context. When
106
is very little. And when we talk about the billions of dollars that are invested, let's say the Saudis they have in the United States, in England, and it kind of it kind of made me wonder why the media, in particular in the United States, decided to name King Abdullah rather than MBS or name the ruling family in the UAE and Bahrain. Do you feel it has anything to do politically, let's say, for example, with a shift, let's say opening the borders with Syria? Does that have anything to do with it?
I don't. I'm not a conspiratorial thinker, and as you said, this information has been around with journalists for more than 6 months. So the issue of Syria was not available at that time. And yes, the timing now appears to be connected, but I don't think that when the journalists decided and the organization in Washington decided 6 months ago that they will publish this on October 3rd, that they actually knew that on October 3rd, the borders between Jordan and Syria would open. I don't think that is the case. I think what made it sexy, what made it attractive, is that they tried to connect between U.S. public money and donor money to Jordan and the fact that Jordan is a very poor country with very high level of unemployment. The optics of that is very big. When you talked about the Saudi Arabia, it's a rich country and the money is available to people, and nobody questions that the money is public money. They consider, these people to be rich, very rich, and therefore the fact that they're avoiding to pay taxes anyway, they don't pay taxes in their own country, the royalty. So it's not a big story. So I think they did like that kind of a comparison. My problem with that story is that they did not cross the T's and dot the I's on the donor money. They did not show that this 106 million that he used actually came from the American people or from the Jordanian people or from anybody other than the private wealth of the family. And I think that's where they were a bit sloppy or maybe even unfair by hinting that this is taken from the donor money, even without saying that. They're saying, by the way, Jordan gets $1.5 billion every year in donor money, and the king has $106 million of properties. They don't say that they take the money, but it gives that impression. And I think this was a dishonest piece. This juxtaposition was dishonest. But generally, the problem in the Middle East is that our media is totally controlled by governments, and even the private media, even the independent media are under a lot of control. Our organization published the Pandora box related to King Abdullah, and it lasted for 3 hours. That's how long we were allowed to keep it on before all hell, came on to pressure us to take it off or else. And so some journalists practiced self-censorship from the first point, didn't even publish it. Others, wavered. But in the end, the public did not get to know the story, even though they heard the admission later, the next day. But they didn't actually hear what actually they were talking about.
Which adds more mystery to the story if you have nothing to worry about instead of creating, opening the, the forum, let's say, to debate it and talk about it. And then people will be rest assured that there was nothing wrong with it. But you were spot on when you said talked about the optics, because I was reading actually, and this is a quote from Reuters and the way they presented. They said on Monday, Abdullah denied any impropriety in his purchase of luxury homes abroad. The allegations come as Abdullah seeks international aid to pull his impoverished country out of recession and could unsettle Jordan's critical relationship with the international community. So they connect the aid to that and make you think as if he's using the aid to purchase properties in the United States. And
Right. This is the problem of the juxtaposition and the way that the framing, we call it in the journalism, the framing. They framed the story. They had a storyline that is attractive, to be honest. I mean, you look at a king with lots of money and his people are poor. Why isn't he spending money on his people? And it's true. I mean, that is a fact. But I think it's the impression and the innuendo is much bigger than the reality.
And I'm going to give you another example also from another story. I think this was through, I think the Washington Post. And then they connected, they say in early 2021, a perpetrated coup concocted by Prince Hamza, King Abdullah II's half-brother, alongside Bassem Awadallah, a former chief of the Royal Hashemite Court, whom many Jordanians despised due perceived corruption, was thwarted. So they throw in another story which has nothing to do with this, and then they throw the word corruption in it. So again, that's how they create that, like you said, the sensationalization. I was, like, to tell you the truth, I was really surprised about why they decided to hone in on King Abdullah. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it.
The American media, and especially let's call it the liberal American media, has been very tough on Trump. And they were very strongly sympathetic to Biden. And I think they feel that they might have gone a little bit overboard, and they're trying to self-correct. And so you saw that they not only are they tough on the king, but they've also been recently very tough on Biden and on his policies and so on. And they're giving the Trump and his people a kind of a wink. They're letting them go because they realize that they need to do whatever you call it, the balance, the fake balance that they wanted to talk about. So I think it's unfortunate for the king that this happened at the time. And actually, the same day that these leaks were published is the day that the king received the reform document from the Royal Commission, which actually is quite good. I mean, there is really some really good items in that reform, both on the ending a lot of the gerrymandering in many of the big cities that favored, certain Jordanians of Jordanian East Bank Jordanians against Jordanians of Palestinian origin, and it gave much more power to parties and raised the threshold so that we will have really serious parties. We will have national parties now, about 41 seats out of the 130 to be elected on the national slates. So there are things going in the right direction. They're saying it's going to take 10 years for the whole system to become a parliamentary monarchy. But in the meantime, this is the second blow within 1 year that has really shaken up the palace and the king's attempt to try to get out of the COVID in a way that allows the country to get back on its feet.
What about this opening the borders with Syria? This is just on a different topic. I mean, I believe this is a major move. I mean, here Bashar al-Assad calls the king to thank him about this. And I think it's a departure from, the prior policy, just to now will change basically the equation vis-a-vis Syria. Trade, it's another, way for the Syrians now who have been suffering for years under this economical crisis, and basically they can have a route through Jordan for trade and people and commerce and people coming and going.
Well, it started with the crisis in Lebanon, because the Lebanese were having a hard time getting gas and electricity. And so when the King Abdullah visited the White House, he sought and succeeded in getting a waiver on what is called the Caesar Law. Caesar Law says anybody who deals economically with the Bashar al-Assad government will be boycotted and will pay, will be sanctioned. And so the king asked for a waiver because Jordan and Syria are neighbors, and Jordan, the same way they sought a waiver during the oil for food program with Iraq, that they cannot survive without the ability to trade with Syria and via Syria. So Biden and his administration gave them that waiver. And once that waiver was, implemented, Jordan was able to sell electricity. Jordan has like 2 gigabytes or whatever of electricity that they don't need. They produce more electricity than they need, and Lebanon has less electricity than they need. And so it made sense to fix up the pylons in Syria and get the electricity from Jordan via Syria to Lebanon. And the same with the Egyptian gas that, was flowing for a long time from Egypt to Jordan, now can go from Egypt to Jordan to Syria to Lebanon. So these things are, a good sign for pan-Arab cooperation and so on. And Jordan, which has suffered a lot because of the closure of the borders with Iraq and then with Syria, can start breathing a little bit. I've been talking to hotel owners, I've been talking to taxi drivers, and they're starting to feel things are moving. And people who have not worked for a while are starting to get jobs and starting to get business. Hotels occupancy rates are going up. So things are starting to turn in a positive way, and then this thing happens. And I think that's also why people, I think, are not going to give it much attention, because they really want the economy to improve. People are really concerned about the economy, about the price of oil, about the price of bread, about the ability to find jobs for their kids. And they are not paying so much attention to a lot of the politics.
So at the end of the day, you think this whole thing about the Pandora is just going to pass very quickly? It's not going to affect policies in Jordan, and people are more focused about their well-being and their economy, right?
I hope it can fix the one problem that I think is clear now is the media. I think it's clear that Jordan's media needs revamping, and I think they need to really open up and to stop these silly games of trying to put steel walls in a world that is totally open, and information is going in all directions.
Well, how do you think now? I mean, now is Jordan coming out of the COVID, or are you still having a problem? How has that been affecting the economical situation there?
No, I think they've done a good job with the COVID. Most people have taken the two vaccines. Some people have taken the booster vaccine, especially those who took the Chinese and the other vaccines. And, early on they created that golden triangle between Aqaba and Wadi Ram and Petra. And the few people who lived there were all vaccinated, and nobody was allowed in unless they were vaccinated. So tourism started picking up in Petra area. And now the whole country is opening up, and the airports are opening up. Still, you need to be vaccinated to leave or to come or to have negative PCR results. But there are a number of hospitalizations, the positivity rate is quite low, and the ICU units are not as full as they were before. So I think they seem to have good control over it.
Daoud Kuttab, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Hala Jamal, take care.
Take care.
That's the voice and the face of Daoud Kuttab, award-winning journalist from the Middle East. You know what, Jamal? He's exactly right. You're exactly right. This is not a big deal in the middle. I mean, isn't it pretty much known, I won't say accepted, but maybe accepted, that rulers, leaders in the Middle East will take money from state coffers and kind of use it for their personal gain. That's always happened. So it's really not a big deal, I guess.
It's not a big deal in the Middle East, and also there is the problem of reporting about it in the Middle East. Daoud Kuttab talks about actually the censorship that is
right.
The crackdown that's going on in Jordan and, of course, in other countries. The thing that jumped to my attention when this first broke, the Washington Post published it, Reuters, AP, everyone else, is the prominence of King Abdullah II of Jordan in the headline. Yes, he's the poorest guy in the bunch. I mean, if
That's
we're
right.
talking about,
Right.
I mean, is it a big surprise to say that the Saudis own properties in Beverly Hills, New York City, London, Paris, the south of France, multi-million-dollar yachts, private jets? Hey, you're going to tell me they also have Swiss bank accounts? Is that going to surprise you?
No, of course not.
So he is the poorest one in the bunch, and we know since his father, King Hussein, he had property in the United States, he had property in the UK, in London, and so on. And the figure that they have for him is like about $100 million and change, which is nothing in today's wealth. When you have the billionaires and the zillionaires, this is peanuts. So two things which actually Daoud spoke about, which I appreciate it. One, because I was like trying to think, what's the timing of this? Because King Abdullah of Jordan just opened the borders with Syria. And he said, no, because this has been in the planning weeks ago. And also they worked on uncovering these documents months, so that there is no connection. But then why is the connection all of a sudden, instead of saying MBS or the Emir of Qatar or the Emir, to name him, I think that's sensationalization because of the recent, for example, coup by his brother or half-brother. But most importantly, because Jordan receives U.S. aid and international aid.
Correct.
The Saudis kind of, they have tons of money, billions and billions of money, fine. They can siphon the country dry. Would give them a pass, even though they've been mentioned. They've mentioned the Qataris, they've mentioned others. So that's the kind of the game. But I think the most important thing of the story is that I don't know why the media ganged up on King Abdullah, aside from sensationalization, aside from trying to show that difference, like he's waiting to get U.S. aid and so forth. Let's ruin it for him. That he's been actually beaten. He had other scandals like with a coup. So it's an unfair, I think, in my opinion, representation.
Yeah, I agree. But I have one theory. I mean, it's not so much a theory, Jamal. It's more of an observation. Is that the wealth disparity in Jordan between the royal family and the king and everybody else is perceived, whether or not it's in reality extreme, but it's perceived that Jordan has one of the poorest, GDPs, per capita ratios of GDP. I mean, the poverty level in Jordan, the numbers of Palestinian refugees, the number of Syrian refugees, just the poverty level is so great that the discrepancy between just how terrible the living conditions are for so many people in Jordan, and the fact that the king of Jordan would, buy this property in Southern California on the beach and, have all these properties.
I disagree just because it's all about perception.
Right.
And we have the perception that Saudis are all doing well. It's only a minority of the Saudis who are. In fact, for example, health in services in Jordan is very good. Education is superb in Jordan compared to other Arab countries. Saudi Arabia, you have areas that don't have infrastructure, Jess. We've seen a few years ago when they had floods. Those are the ones, the fat cats that we all see. We assume that everyone is doing really well in Saudi Arabia and, of course, other countries, Gaddafi had billions of dollars outside. When I went to Libya, some parts of Libya did not have paved roads, and
that's why I think it's a perception issue. That's all I'm saying is that the way it can be portrayed, it's a little easier to paint the perception of the wealth disparity in Jordan than other countries. Because you're exactly right. The wealth disparities in all the Gulf countries is great too. The wealth is in a very few hands, but the pictures of and the images of poor health and desperate living conditions with all of the camps in Jordan right now, it's easier to paint that picture for the king of Jordan than it may be in other places. But I have a question for you. What about Sisi? Sisi has stole billions of dollars, and Egyptian wealth disparities are very extreme, maybe even more extreme than in Jordan. Why was Sisi off the list?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't gone through the whole list. And let's put it this way. We should worry about the ones who have not been mentioned in the list because they are the smartest. And they're the ones that kept their, basically, loot away from scrutiny.
Right. Well,
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. We should move to another topic, Jess, because it's very important.
Do you want to talk about? Yeah,
have passed since the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and really, no one has paid basically for what happened to him.
Well, that's not entirely true, as you and I both know. Some people have been, thrown under the bus and and are in jail and in prison in Saudi Arabia by MBS, as scapegoats, obviously, but in the broader international arena of human rights and international law, basically the Saudis and MBS have gotten away literally with murder. No one has held them accountable. The United States, the EU, the ICC, no one has been able to hold MBS, even though the United States intelligence services, Jamal, implicated MBS directly in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. He's gotten away with murder.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Really, the ones who were behind the murder, who gave the order, not some push button, like go and do the job. We know. And some of them actually, the ones who were involved, like, we heard that they were fired from the job or given sentences, but we don't know if these sentences were basically applied because, in Saudi Arabia, there is the death penalty. So if you murder, you immediately pretty much doesn't take a long time for you to get beheaded, really, in Saudi Arabia. So just a slap on the wrist is not what I say bringing people to justice for someone who was taken right at the Saudi embassy in Turkey and chopped terribly to death. So the recent news, couple of recent news, because of on the 3rd anniversary, two things are happening. And I think in two countries who are very much allied with Saudi Arabia, the UK and the United States. The United States, we spoke last week, the United States are just pretty much approved more military weapons sale to Saudi Arabia in the range between $400 and $500 million. And recently, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, he led a delegation to the Middle East, and they went to Saudi Arabia and stopped and saw Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, on September 28th. Basically finalizing the deal. And they had some questions about the conflict in Yemen, like they wanted. And but supposedly there were news that they asked about Khashoggi. It's BS. Asked, like, what happened to Khashoggi?
It's BS.
But
excuse me.
They approved the deal.
Yeah, but don't insult us. Don't insult anybody with a modicum of intelligence or appreciation of those things. The very fact that Jake Sullivan would go to Saudi Arabia legitimizes MBS. It legitimizes his, brutal assault on the people of Yemen. It legitimizes his ability to murder his critics, like Jamal Khashoggi. And remember, Jamal Khashoggi lived in the United States and just happened to be in Turkey in order to get some documents. So let's call it what it is. It's a legitimization of a brutal, thuggish regime in Saudi Arabia. There's no accountability here whatsoever. And I'm sad to say is that if we don't get it under the Biden administration, is there any hope or Boris Johnson's, administration, and we'll get to him in a second too, will there ever be any accountability for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? There won't be, I'm sad to say.
No, when we're talking about it now 3 years later, nothing happened. And if you fast forward 4 years, 5 years, no one will be talking about it. And that's the whole thing, is the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, the normalizations of MBS as a world leader, because he's going, as you know, he's running the country, not his father. And then the other story is, like I said, the two major allies is the United Kingdom. And, we know the word whitewashing. We use that a lot when we talk about Israel, and there is pink washing, but there is now a new term called sports washing.
Sports washing. Yes.
Sports washing, and that's what's happening in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I saw an interview just yesterday by the widow of the murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi, Hatis Sencheg, and she was pleading and horrified at the perspective that the Newcastle United, this is a very important soccer or football team in the UK, is going to be taken over by Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And she was urging the Premier League to not cave in and block the deal. So this is part of the sports washing. Amnesty International also called on the Premier League to focus on human rights issues and sports washing as the proposed sale of a consortium led by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the PIF, who is the chair of the Public Investment Fund, Jess?
MBS.
Mohammed bin Salman, MBS.
Yeah.
He wants to buy this British football team for a reported 300 million British pounds.
But Jamal, it's not just any British football team. They're part of the Premier League in the UK. They're one of the. It would be like MBS wanting to buy the New York Yankees or the Dallas Cowboys or something like that. It's that big of a deal that he is trying to take over one of the premier UK identified football clubs, in the entire United Kingdom. So it's insulting. I think the term sports washing makes perfect sense. And it is. And 3 years ago, Mohammed bin Salman got away with murder. It's been 3 years on. He's played his cards right. He's denied everything. He's completely gotten over it. The United States under the Biden administration will sell him more armaments. More Yemenis are being killed. There's more silencing of dissent in Saudi Arabia now than there was 3 years ago. So we don't need any more evidence to show that this murderer has gotten away without being held accountable. And the United States and the UK, Jamal, are complicit in the death of Jamal Khashoggi.
Yes, and sadly, it looks like the deal is going to go through.
Of course it's going to go through.
They're voting on it as we're speaking, or they might have. I haven't received the results, but it looks like
I'll tell you what
we
the
might
vote's
wake up
be.
tomorrow and this football team will be owned by MBS.
Of course it's going to be owned by MBS. I have breaking news for everybody. If you look at Boris Johnson, if you look at the UK government right now, which is basically, it's a right-wing party. And we know that from, so many different things that Boris Johnson does, including his cozy relationship with the Israelis. Of course, MBS is going to buy this team. There's no way that Boris Johnson and his government would put up any kind of any stink about that. So, yeah, we will see murderers and thugs get away with murder and be able to buy football teams. Absolutely.
Well, speaking of Boris Johnson, a new report shows that he had 5 trips to Israel.
Is that all?
Starting from November. Well, he had more, but these ones, and this is, that shows you about the lobby's influence. These ones, as he first entered the parliament, they were all funded by the Israeli government and the Conservative Friends of Israel, the CFI, a powerful Westminster lobby group which does not disclose its funders, but has claimed 80% of conservative MPs are members. And then part of this report, Jess, 23 cabinet ministers that you have today, in his cabinet, of the 23 cabinet ministers, 8 have been funded to visit Israel, while members of the parliament, again, with paid junkets and what have you. It's something we know that this happens all the time in this country.
It's not too surprising, but it seems like in the UK, it's more they have more cover to not disclose funders and who's part of it, and they can get away with it because the Labor Party in the UK right now, Jamal, it's fragmented. It's not well. Its voice, it's having a hard time finding its voice in light of, Boris Johnson's, regime right now. And let's say this, Jamal, Boris Johnson goes to Israel 5 times. It's paid by, Israeli PAC money. But we should also talk about the fact that Boris Johnson's ability to govern the UK in the midst of a pandemic and Brexit has been a disaster. Our listeners and viewers may not know that there are significant economic problems right now in the UK because there's a huge gas shortage. And because of Brexit, they're not able to get enough drivers to haul gasoline and petrol and fuel, from various places in the EU to the United Kingdom. So it is a big disaster, but Boris Johnson apparently has no problem being influenced by the Israeli lobby in the UK. And
on the same topic, the Israeli lobby in the UK, since we're talking about it, the University of Bristol has sacked a sociology professor accused of anti-Semitic comments.
Let's hear
following
his comments.
A high-profile investigation. And after Jewish students said that they felt unsafe and unprotected on campus. Did you hear the same thing somewhere else, Jess? Have you heard this? It's unsafe and unprotected?
We hear it. We've heard it every day, Jamal, for decades now in the United States. And it seems like the Israeli playbook used in the United States to attack Palestinian professors or professors who advocate for Palestinian rights, they're using the same tactics against professors in the UK. They don't feel safe. Right.
Yeah. So that's the common denominator. So basically the university said, although they did not find that the comments or the alleged comments did not constitute, and this is, I'm quoting, unlawful speech. A disciplinary hearing concluded that he did not meet the standards of behavior we expect from our staff. So if we're talking about academic freedom, and you and I had multiple shows, and we've had multiple, we had Dr. Rabab Abdelhadi, who has our own problems at San Francisco State University, and Stephen Salaita, who also lost his job because of a tweet, basically. And now this is the same scenario repeating itself. It's now in the UK. Miller answered, he said the university, for the record, had embarrassed itself with its decision and accused it of bowing to a pressure campaign against him directed by who else? By Israel. And what's Miller's specialty? His research just specializes in how self perpetuates through lobbying and propaganda. He focuses on propaganda, etc. And just reading from his statement that he issued, I actually tried to get him on the show, but I think he's appealing the decision, so he's not going to speak a lot publicly about it. But he added that it has run a shambolic process, meaning the university process that seems to have been vetted by external actors. Israel's assets in the UK have been emboldened by the university collaborating with them to shut down teaching about Islamophobia. The University of Bristol is no longer safe for Muslim, Arab, or Palestinian students. This is his response.
Well, it's a brilliant response, Jamal, and it's the irony of ironies that Israeli or Jewish students don't feel safe on campuses when the level of anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and Islamophobic hate has been pervading campuses here in the United States and in the UK for, since, how many decades now. So this is the classic Israeli playbook, right? It's called turning the world upside down. You're the aggressor, but you accuse the people for whom you're aggressing on as being the aggressor. So it's the classic Israeli playbook. And they don't just do it at the university, Jamal. This is part of the Israeli foreign policy, right? This is part of the Hasbara campaign, and they just use it at every level. Poor little Israel, they're coming after us, they're attacking us, when in fact, Israel continues to be an occupier, continues to blockade, continues to have human rights abuses, and continues to be labeled as an apartheid state. So my question to you, Jamal, is, isn't it getting a little tired to hear this now? I mean, isn't this Hasbara campaign, it sounds a little weary now. I mean, I don't see how people buy it. And, Professor Miller will appeal it. And, we'll pay attention to that. Maybe we'll get him on the show. But I would suspect that he has quite a good chance of overcoming this really crazy decision.
I'll quote a very famous baseball player, it's deja vu all over again. But Jess, we keep seeing the same thing, the same argument. And I should say, they're going after him because they say in online lectures, he described Israel as the enemy of world peace. Would I describe Israel as the the model of world peace? I mean, what's wrong with this statement?
Well, what's ironic about that, Jamal? If he said the United States is an enemy of world peace,
no one would have said anything.
No one would have said anything. Jamal, if he had said the United Kingdom is the enemy of world peace, no one would give him a hard time. So here you have a UK professor, because he labeled the Israeli foreign policy and its apartheid practices as an enemy of peace, is losing his job, when he could have made the very same comments for his home country as well as the United States, and no one would bat an eye. No one would care. No one would give a you-know-what if he said the same thing about the UK or the United States.
And the silly thing, the university itself, even though they fired him, they issued a statement. They said that his words did not constitute an unlawful speech. So if you are at a educational institution, Jess, this is where you're supposed to have your freedom of speech, and this is where you're supposed to have academic freedom. You cannot criticize a country like Israel and call it an enemy of peace, and then you're going to get fired of it because some students go and complain to the administration saying that you've made them unsafe.
Well, that's why he'll appeal it. That's why we'll follow the story. And I have a sense that, and again, the Israelis and the Hasbara machine never miss an opportunity to overplay their hand, Jamal. I believe they've overplayed their hand yet again. And I believe that this is going to bring even more attention to the corrupt Hasbara campaigns that are inflicting kind of damage to the academy all over the world. I mean, we know what's happening here at San Francisco State. In fact, Professor Abdul Hadi, who we've had on our show so many times, is actually in the middle of her kind of appeal process right now. We'll be getting an update from her at some point in the future. But people are tired of, and I'll just call it what it is, the bullying tactics that the Israeli Hasbara machine and his Israel supporters have. People are tired of it. And I know that people in the UK are tired of it. People here are tired of it. We'll see. We're going to follow this. I think they've overplayed their hand.
We'll end the show by talking about, as you described, your favorite uncle or your favorite grandfather. Well, he passed away since, but we're talking about Shimon Peres.
Everybody loved him. Man.
Everybody loved him. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He, everybody loved him. He was huggable. Your favorite
big teddy
uncle.
Bear. He was a big teddy bear.
Another big teddy bear. And now a former Israeli Labor MK, and who was an ambassador, by the way. Her name is Colette Avital. She had a very, very long career in service, and now she's 81 years old. She finally spoke about her being basically sexually harassed by him. And Avital recalled being invited to dine in Paris's Paris hotel. It sounds like, I said, Weinstein.
Yeah.
She was invited to dine in early 1980s to meet him. She was in France. She's an ambassador, right? So she was then part of the Israeli mission, diplomatic mission. And then when she arrived to his meeting, to go to his room, he was wearing his robe and pajamas. He greeted her. Didn't you hear that story happening with Weinstein? Multiple times he used to invite people to his hotel.
Yeah, well, that's the Weinstein approach, right? And the idea that, it's so morally disgusting that you would invite anybody to your hotel room for a meeting. I mean, that's just like, come on.
Yeah, he's a world leader, and she's part of the diplomatic mission. So he receives her. Then he pushes her towards the bed. She resisted and left the room agitated. And I'm quoting, it took a few seconds, she recalled, stating that then she told Peres's aide, Yossi Belin, who was his aide at the time, that the next time his boss came to Paris, I will not be left alone with him. That's one encounter. He repeated in 1984, she says, after 3 years in Paris, Avital returned to Israel following Shimon Peres and Likud leader Yitzhak Shamir's deal to form a unity government in rotation. She pushed for a position in the new administration, but was told that her gender would prove a barrier to advancement.
Right.
During one meeting, after Peres has declined her request for a prominent position, the new prime minister, and that's her quote, pinned me to the door and tried to kiss me. My legs shook when I left. It repulsed me. So this is the new story about, as you said, Israel's. Just to remind our listeners, he served multiple posts in the Israeli governments. Most prominent as a prime minister and as a president.
Yeah, but
in
Jamal,
Israel.
But let's really talk about it. When the apartheid regime of Israel was facing international condemnation, either because they were killing Palestinians or murder or, whatever horrific thing that the Israeli regime was doing, who would they bring out to calm the tension and speak to the world press community? They would always bring out Shimon Peres.
Yeah,
he was the guy that would kind of say, hey, everything's fine.
Listen, do you know how many American journalists and British journalists and others, I saw them when they were talking with him, all like gaga, interviewing him and praising him. How many interviews have you seen on CNN? How many features they've had about him? Now, not a single one. And this story now, it's 24 hours. We know stories last 48 hours. That will be good in the news cycle. Mention this story. And I'm not asking them to mention it in the same vigor they used to drool all over his achievements and how grandfatherly and wise and worldly he was. Not a single one mentioned it.
Well, here's the thing, Jamal, that will be interesting. It's never just one. It's like if you find one cockroach, you know that there are many others, right? So my feeling is if Shimon Peres did this to one person, there's chances are he did it to many other women And maybe this will give other women the opportunity to speak out about the harassment that they experience. So we can only hope that if there are, that they will feel like this gives them an opportunity to speak to the sexual assaults that they experienced with Mr. Grandfather.
Well, on this note, you've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download all our shows. They're right there for you for free. Download them for free.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.